My father served in Europe during World War II. You mentioned your father was in Korea. What is the main thing to remember about that generation that fought these wars that compared to anything that we've seen in the rest of our lifetimes, were kind of universally acknowledged to be good wars, in one phrase, or to be wars not of choice, but these were existential, battles that we needed to win. What should we be reminding ourselves about as these guys and women pass from the stage?
I do think it's fair to draw that line between a war where we understood while we were fighting it precisely what the stakes were, no less than the world. I mean, just as clearly. I mean, it was clearly laid out, good, bad. And from everything I've read, it just seemed like there was a level of certainty and understanding, not just among the soldiers and airmen and Marines, but among the people at home. Everybody here was engaged in that war. There were rations. All the factories had been retooled. It was a concerted effort, and I don't think the world has ever seen anything like that since. The wars now have obviously taken on not just a political and all kinds of controversies and so forth, but they're long distance. You can fight them from a drone, with a drone, but even more than that, they're an idea for so many, an abstraction for the vast majority of people here at home. So I think that's one lesson. We fought the Second World War together as a country, and I don't think we've done that since. The other thing for me is just the inherent wisdom in Reagan's observation about freedom generally being a generation away. And I don't think it really matters what generation you're talking about. It always feels so fresh and new and terribly immediate for us because here we are alive, with the most recent iteration of the species experiencing things in what feels to us like something new. But of course it's not. History is just a wheel and it always turns, and it's turning faster now, it seems, than it ever has before. But here we are again, a generation away.
In 2003, Gallup found that 70% of Americans in 2003, so not that long ago, 70% were extremely proud to be American. It's now 39% as of last year, which is the most recent year that it was taken. If you are 55 and older, you're 50% likely to be extremely proud to be American. If you are 18 to 34 years old, you're only 18% likely to be extremely proud of being an American. And I guess my question is, how do we explain this, especially since it seems to me, and I think that my father, I won't speak for your father, my father would say this is a much better country than the one that he was born into in 1923. When you think about equality of individuals, whether it's race, sex, class, where you started out, the wealth of the country, et cetera, like in so many profound ways, work is better than it used to be. It is less backbreaking and difficult. Why are we less patriotic? In a country that seems to be going, generally speaking, in the right direction.
I mean, based on the way you frame the question, I can only say it's because we lack the ability to put the past in context. We've lost our perspective. We're not as mobile as we used to be. We don't travel quite as much as we used to.
And it's odd, if I may, we actually have more people have passports, but fewer people move from the county where they were born. So it's a kind of bizarre paradox, right? On some level, we're much more worldly, but on a more basic level, we're living in our parents' backyards.
Well, back to faith, right? We're cocooning and we're burrowing, and and back to the risk thing. We're just less likely to take it. we've forgotten seemingly that the car is not meant to stay in the driveway, and the boat is not meant to stay in the harbor, and the human is not meant to stay in the basement. And so if that is under a kind of assault, that would explain your question in part. But mostly, I think my theory, I can't prove it, but with Dirty Jobs, I used to talk a lot about this idea of being connected to certain almost primal things. And I was so lucky to grow up on a small farm where everybody around me sort of reinforced an appreciation for some very basic things, uh, where our food comes from, where our energy comes from. And, my dad was a social studies teacher, so I always had a real good look at where we come from and what our history is. And so for me, a lot of stuff that I've tried to grapple with might be too grand, but whether it's on the foundation level or the TV level or now a movie, is to answer the question, well, what happens when we become disconnected from these basic things? And how profoundly are we disconnected from these things? And I would say to you that the answer is really quite a bit because of the erosion of the grout or the mortar in the brick wall, which I liken to those social sort of civic organizations we were talking about before. We're real disconnected from that. We're certainly disconnected from our history to the point where we're having conversations about 1619 and all sorts of other things. And we can't agree as adults what we ought to be showing kids. We're very disconnected from that. And you can see it too in our statuary. You can see it in the monuments and memorials. I talked to dozens of park rangers whose main job now is to get up and just scrub off the filth, scrub off the graffiti, clean it up, you know?
Yeah, you talk in one of the section of the movie about graffiti on the Lincoln Memorial, which is literally under construction. There's going to be a new element to it. What was the kind of graffiti? What's showing up on the Lincoln Memorial?
It's just all of the normal stuff, you go through it was the Antifa thing, there's a fascist thing, there's a BLM thing, then it's the next thing, now there's a Hamas thing, and there's a certain cohort in our country who want to express their sentiment, not just on a highway overpass, but they want to do it on Jefferson's memorial. They want to do it.
Have you ever painted graffiti anywhere, Mike Rowe?
Yeah, I did actually. I hired a graffiti artist for the 200th episode of Dirty Jobs, and we went to the dump and created these giant murals. But I think if you're saying, have I ever taken a can of spray paint and tagged my colors somewhere? No, it's still on the list.
How to go back to this question of patriotism and also progress, because and I'm thinking, we talk about World War II. The troops were segregated by race in World War II. The first major conflict that the U.S. military saw integrated troops was Korea. We're so much better than that now. How do we acknowledge the failings of the past, and also the failings of the present, while also acknowledging immense progress has been made, or that we are getting better?
It's the fault in our stars. We can't see. Maybe it's the nature of the binary times that we're in that makes it very, very difficult to applaud one thing without condemning another. I think we're afraid to take a victory lap, and maybe we should be. Maybe that's just a bit premature or arrogant. But on the other hand, back to the under construction metaphor, I didn't set out to kind of make that a leitmotif in the movie, but it is. And I realized about halfway through, everywhere I went, Nick, Arlington, I found my grandfather's grave at Arlington, and I wanted to do this big, beautiful thing there. But the heavy machinery is 10 feet away, and they're redoing the grounds. Lincoln Memorial, we had this whole idea, but that's under construction. Jefferson Memorial, right? Refurbishments under construction. You know, the Key Bridge, at the end, we feature that, and it's on the bottom of the Patapsco River. And so when you start to look around, it did hit me pretty hard. It's like we're never going to be finished. Our country is a work in progress. It was formed by imperfect people, and we've done yeoman's work along the way. We are by no means done. But to your point, oh my God, look how far we've come. And if we can't take a moment to celebrate that, then then I worry. That's why I do value the 4th of July. I do value Independence Day. It's time, it ought to be a time to come back together and say, hey, the Star Spangled Banner, you know what that thing really was? It was a protest song. But before that, it was a drinking song. So why can't we figure that out? Is there no symbol left that would allow us to come together as Americans? Has everything become a talisman, from a mask to a flag to this flag or that flag? Seemingly the answer seems to be yeah, it has. And that's probably a better answer to your earlier question. It's the burrowing that I worry about.
Is there a way to kind of define the American experience independent of military exploits?
I think the only way to do that is to get everyone to pass through some sort of filter first, some sort of virtuous idea. It could be persistence, could be delayed gratification. There's any number of things you can talk about as virtuous and therefore uniting. But I think the big one and the best one is probably gratitude. I think the American experience can start with people who affirmatively say, look, I get it. We're not all starting from the same place. In fact, we're about as divergent as you could be as an individual. But gratitude, unlike your skin color or your hair color or your star sign or your blood type, it's a choice, right? Anybody can choose. Anybody can choose to be grateful for the fact that they've hit the greatest lottery of all time. You were born, for God's sakes. Miracle. You're walking around in one of the greatest places ever. I know it's probably triggering for some people to hear that, but historically, I just don't know where else you would rather live or when. To your point, there's just no better time to get sick. There's just no better time to face any sort of adversity than right now in this country. So the idea of at least setting the table first with, God help me, this sounds like Tony Robbins meets, I don't know, Wim Hof or something, but there is an attitude of gratitude, and it is a conscious thing to do. And it gets too earnest and it gets too exhausting to maintain for too long. But if you can't do it on Independence Day, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. You've talked about, some of the issues here. What, and the solution to cocooning is to, and I am going to mess up this metaphor because I don't remember how butterflies, change from caterpillars or whatever, but, you got to come out of the cocoon, right? And you got to fly. What are the best ways to do that, do you think?
Oh, well, it's back to the Boy Scouts for me.
Slingshots with marbles at 30 feet away, right?
Bear traps, pistols.
Maybe well, we don't have aerosol cans anymore, but aerosol cans and cigarette lighters, right?
Sure. No. Although the whole dueling thing, pistols at dawn, broadswords in a pit, it's funny. It's a fun thing to ruminate on. Were we better mannered when we knew that gentlemen could settle their differences, with mortal stakes? It happened all the time. Don't know. Not recommending it. just saying it's kind of interesting. The answer to your question, uh, going back to the Boy Scouts, I thought for the longest time that the goal was to figure out a way to be willing to be uncomfortable, to be willing to get out of your comfort zone, away from, we didn't call them safe spaces then, but right, just to that willingness to venture out. That's what I thought the real coin of the realm was. But Mr. Huntington pulled me aside one day and said, it's not that exactly. What you got to do, Mike, is you got to figure out a way to love it. Embrace the suck, as the SEALs would say. That's what you need to do. You need to first, you need to identify the thing that makes you uncomfortable. Then you need to be grateful enough for the life that you have that you're willing to be uncomfortable. And then you have to figure out a way to love it. And then something interesting is probably going to happen for you. And I think most everybody in this film can't prove it, don't know. It's why the stories all came out of this thing called The Way I Heard It. I wasn't there, Nick, when the Emancipation was signed or the Declaration. I don't know. And so we take some liberties for sure. But, when it comes to our history, it really is vexing to have so many experts in the same room who can't agree. It's unnerving. I think we're really unnerved today in general, right? Because whether it's medicine or politics or journalism, at every turn, we seem to be confronted with experts who are not on the same page. Maybe that's why we're profoundly disconnected. Maybe that's why we can't feel great about the progress we've made. Maybe we're getting such giant mixed messages from these fire hoses of information in disparate directions, we don't know which one to drink from.
Do you think part of it is that our leaders, and I'm thinking our political leaders, certainly our military leaders, the people who ran the Boy Scouts of America, they failed us in pretty profound ways. I mean, the Boy Scouts had a major sexual predator controversy that they really kind of elided until their boots were really held to the fire. When you think about the military adventurism of the 21st century, whatever else you can say about it is, nobody was being honest about what we were trying to do and whether we were achieving it. Our politicians, and I don't mean this glibly, I mean this in a dark and serious way, are liars. They cannot tell the truth, even if, they swear in front of judges and things like that. How do we get past that, as a citizenry?
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of that stuff feels terribly relevant when you're living in it. Like when you're looking out at an elected official who's living in your time and betraying the public trust, betraying your vote, breaking your heart, misspending your tax money. When those things happen in real time, we have a level of righteous indignation that is both warranted, explicable, and justified. But today it's not that. It's that same feeling of outrage over men who made mistakes 260 years ago that weren't seen as mistakes 260 years ago. And there's something just so blithely grand about our superciliousness when we just look back and go, oh no, not him. He did that 260 years ago. I don't care about all the good things he did. We're going to look at this, and that statue's got to come down. It's got to come down. And if we don't have the nuance, if we don't have the wherewithal to ask this question, namely, what's going to happen 250 years from now? How are we going to be remembered, Nick? What are our greats going to look back and say about the Gillespies, those meat eaters? What the hell were they thinking?
Those pet owners.
How dare you?
Yeah.
And look, fill in the blank. Abortion.
Given all of this, are you optimism, or what gives you optimism, other than the occasional upgrades at the Four Seasons or the Ritz?
Well,
Carl T.
there's that.
Chang. Yeah.
There is that. Um, I'm I had this conversation earlier today with somebody, and I think I made up a word that I really like. I was teetering back and forth between skepticism and optimism. We were talking about AI, and I said, I think I'm skeptimistic. And they were like, "Oh, that's terribly clever." And I said, "I don't know about it's terribly clever, but the more I think about it, it's the answer to your question. It's the comfort that you get when you know that it's going to get better, but it's got to get worse first. It's like it's the splat. Sometimes things have to go splat before everybody kind of gets the memo. And I don't know what that means in this case exactly. And I'm afraid there probably won't be one universal event that we can all look at and go, yep, well, there you go. There's your splat. Now we can all get back to being sane. It'll probably happen in dribs and drabs, splatters, if you will.
Yeah. Do you have a do you have a sense of that, given some of the events and timelines that you've kind of name checked in this? There was a sense in the 70s, and as old as we might be, we're too young to really remember the 70s. I mean, if you 40 years old or 50 years old in the 70s, but there was, there was a sense of doom and gloom. Whether environmentalists and evangelical Christians were both prophesying that the end was nigh. I mean, the world was basically over. And then sometime in the 80s, that shifted. And the country went from being kind of in the doldrums to being a little bit ecstatic. Do you remember that? And, do you think that kind of vibe shift, I guess, is the phrase that gets used sometime? Do you feel like that's in the offing right now?
Are you kidding me with the vibe shift? That's a thing? Huh. Well, I guess if you can be a skeptimist, you can vibe shift. I heard something the other day. A guy was talking about the music that matters most. And the upshot of the whole thing was it's almost always the music that you heard between 17 and 24. And that's true, sort of, for me. God, I can't imagine what people are going to be influenced by, 17 years from now, but whatever. I think the same holds true with virtually everything. Heaven's Gate, the prognostications for all of the end of days, the Armageddons, all of that. And then today, it's different, but not really. I mean, I was told with great certainty by elected officials 6 years ago that we had 12 years. 12 years until the climate poops the bed in one enormous splat. We were told in the early 70s the ice age was coming. We were told, I mean, for as long as I've been alive and for as much history as I've read, the end has always been near. And the doomsayers have always been awfully certain. And they found their experts to confirm the doom. And so I'm not freaked out personally. Uh, I mean, I'm not blasé about it, but I don't think you and I have lived through anything that hasn't been lived through by virtually everyone. And the fact that it feels new to us is great. I mean, it's part of the fun thing about being alive. But the arrogance that follows when you assume that you you now represent the absolute height of evolved thinking and understanding and enlightenment or awakenings or woke or however you want to call it. That's part of this too. There's gratitude requires a measure of humility, and curiosity requires an even larger dose. How in the world can you be genuinely curious? The virtue that I personally think is is right up there with gratitude, maybe even supersedes it. How can you be curious if you know the answer to a thing? You know, how can you be a scientist if you're not first and foremost willing to say, I'm standing by to be disproved at all times, you know? So we need some more of that back somehow or another. The Boy Scouts have to stop shooting with a shotgun. Uh, your neighbors, you know, we need to know our neighbors. We need to know their names. We don't have to like them, but we ought to figure out a way to hang out once in a while because geography matters immensely. History matters, you know, in a colossal way. And patriotism, that doesn't have anything to do with politics. But we've conflated the two so much that back to the talismans, right? If you think this, if you say that, if you sing that song, get your hand off your heart. What does that mean? What exactly are you? So why are you repeating those words? Yeah, you know, we've burrowed ourselves into that butterfly cocoon thing you were talking about.
Mike Rowe, thanks for talking to Reason.
Well, Nick, it's always a pleasure.